the two men there, so Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, shaking hands with our colleague Michelle Hussein after an hour and 15 minutes of clashes and claims.
And what a spiky debate it was. Very spiky indeed. Thanks to Michelle, of course, as well. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer there. They've had their say here in the spin room. Their supporters will be vying to make their claim that their man was the winner. So in the next half hour, politicians and journalists will tell us, was it dazzling or disaster? And most important, of course, remember, Robert and Tasneem, two of the questioners from the audience, will be with us too. We'll find out if they thought the answers from the two men were good enough. Yeah, and we'll be checking out some of the claims that were made by both men. But first, before all that, we're in the spin room. Laura, you have frequented many of these establishments, shall we say, over time. How did that go, do you think? Well, it was very intense. It was very spiky, as you said. You could tell that both men know that the time is now. This is when the country, millions of people are tuning in to find out what they stand for, and those undecided voters are starting to think what they're going to do when they get into the polling booth. There were two words in particular that both men kept coming back to. Rishi Sunak, I think for the first time in this campaign, kept using the word surrender. Surrender, don't surrender the borders, don't surrender your finances. He even used that word in his closing statement. His whole thrust, a very aggressive warning to voters watching about what Labour would look like. Keir Starmer's favourite phrase seemed to be 14 years, 14 years, 14 years, consistently trying to remind people watching of the Conservatives' record. So those two very clear bits of messaging coming from both men in a very, very intense debate. But I think a lot of people watching at home might feel that the moment of the night was from one of our questioners who stood up and said, putting both of them on the spot, are you really the best that we can do? Yeah, and that's Robert, and we're going to have him. But at the end of the day, do you think the dial will have moved when it comes to the polls or whatever with 7 days to go? Well, it is very late for the Conservatives to make a recovery. They've been behind for months in the run-up to the election, and the polls haven't really budged very much at all. So Rishi Sunak is definitely on the back foot. Yeah. But we saw a much punchier Rishi Sunak tonight. And I wonder if some of our viewers, some of you at home and some Conservatives will be thinking, where was that fighter in the last few weeks? There's no question we saw him being very more aggressive. We can see Keir Starmer leaving the debate, I think, tonight. There he is, leaving the venue here in Nottingham after a very, very intense an hour and 15 minutes. Right then, I want to show you where we are. So this is the spin room where the parties are beginning to busily trying to claim victory. Let me show you around because it gets pretty crazy in here. We've got journalists from all the other broadcasters, our print colleagues here. And let me show you, this is what happens. So in the middle of that scrum is Pat McFadden. Oh, the Health Secretary Victoria Atkins has just bumped into me. We're live on BBC One. You're live on BBC One. A very brief word. We're going to talk to your colleague in a second, but you chipper or not?
I thought Rishi showed his plan for the future, but also the very serious choice we will make as a country next week. Okay. We must not surrender.
Okay, we're going to talk to the Home Secretary in just a minute, but I couldn't resist grabbing a word. Now, this is what happens. There's the Labour Party, some of their top team, Pat McFadden, their campaign chief, Jonathan Ashworth, one of his colleagues, and Labour's press team there. And I just want to show you around the other side. This is what happens behind the scenes in journalism. All our broadcast colleagues on air as this argument is far from over. So the two main men have an hour and 15 minutes on the stage fighting it out as they very much did tonight, but it is not all over bar the shouting, because now the contest to claim victory really gets underway. Clive.
All right, thank you for that little tour of the environment here, and I'm pleased to say that our two guests, audience members who ask questions, have just joined us. Robert Blackstone, Tasneem Zahara, thank you so much. First of all, Robert, your question brought gasps. Is this the best we've got to choose from? That was your question. And what was the response? Were you, I don't know, did you think that perhaps things improved as a result of what you heard?
No.
No?
No. I was disappointed with the response from both Rishi and Sir Keir. Neither of them seemed to want to say why they were good, if that makes any sense. They were sort of going on what they'd done in the past. They weren't saying that they weren't being positive. From a Prime Minister, from my perspective, we want a personality. We want somebody that we can recognise. We want somebody on the world stage that is going to project our Great Britain.
Right.
That's what we want.
Yeah. Well, Tasneem, I mean, you were talking about possibly leaving the country. You know, what could these two leaders tell you to make you feel, unlike your friends who've already left, that you have a future here in this country?
I really wanted them to mention the quality of life that's in the UK versus other countries. Why are young people leaving the UK to other countries like the UAE, like Australia? It is the quality of life here. It's detrimental here. It is the cost of houses and trying to get onto the property ladder without parental help. Because a lot of young people do not have parental help, and that is just the facts. They didn't mention about how can I, as a young person, feel confident that I will get a very good, well-paying job with my skill set. The unemployment rates for grads is astronomical now, and universities are churning out graduates year on year, but firms and companies, they're cutting their headcount, and university graduates are left, with almost like a depression. It's very hard to find a job now. So I really wanted them to touch on the quality of life and the jobs. Yes, Rishi Sunak said that he will implement a 5% deposit with a loan that we can get from the government for 20%. But that's another loan. They didn't say anything about reducing the cost of houses. They didn't say anything about our quality of life here. So I didn't really feel confident with their answers, neither of them.
Okay, back to you, Robert, because you're a long-time Conservative voter.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how you're feeling now with 7 days to go before you've got to make the big decision.
Still undecided, I'm afraid.
You're one of the undecideds.
I am very much so, yes. And tonight, in fairness to both the politicians that we've seen, they haven't made me decide one way or the other. I worry about things that haven't been talked about. I worry about inheritance tax.
Right.
I worry about council banding. I worry about fuel duty. We're being pushed down, or I say being pushed, we're being persuaded to go down the electric vehicle route. Fuel duty provides a huge revenue to the Treasury. How are they going to replace that?
All right. Okay, and Tasneem, what about you? 7 days to go. How are you feeling, you one way or the other, in terms of where you may cast your vote?
Before coming here, I kind of had my mind set on which way I'm inclining towards. However, neither party is really enticing to me. Although Rishi Sunak might have enticing incentives for young people, like reducing the stamp duty and so on, after the last 14 years of flimsy promises and empty promises, how am I to tell that there will be results out of these promises? I can't. There's no results. There hasn't been any results since the last 14 years. So, although I may not agree entirely with either leader, I'll have to make a strategic vote.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Tasneem, Richard, thank you. Robert, thank you so much for that. Now, Laura, who's with you here in the spin room?
Well, we'd already bumped into the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, didn't we? But with me now is the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and Wes Streeting for Labour, who wants to be the Health Secretary in about 8 days' time now. Firstly to you, Wes Streeting, who reminds being the front runner in this race, but he was a bit on the back foot tonight, wasn't he?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the Prime Minister was very shouty, interrupty and not very prime ministerial. But if Keir got across the fundamental argument, which is with a week to go now, this election is not decided. People only get change if they vote for it. And it's very clear from Rishi Sunak's performance, if we have 5 more years of the Conservatives, nothing will change. In fact, if there is any change, it will be certainly change for the worse. Whenever he was pressed on how he funds his policies, he wasn't able to answer the questions thrown up by his own Chancellor today of the enormous black hole in their own spending plans. I mean, this is Liz Truss on steroids, and that's the big risk of 5 more years of Conservative chaos, division and incompetence.
James, you're shaking your head there.
Well, he wasn't going to agree.
So what we saw from Keir Starmer was someone who's very, very fragile when actually pushed to answer the questions. He talked over Michelle, he talked over Rishi, he talked over the audience, which is why Rishi really had to assert himself. But what we saw over and over again was Starmer failing to answer the questions, failing to answer what it means to be a woman, failing to answer what he would do with asylum seekers from countries you can't return.
I think our audience knows that actually they were both interrupting a lot, and it looked to me like Rishi Sunak had a new deliberate target, which was just hammer away, and he kept using the word surrender. Now, he was accusing Labour of wanting to surrender people's finances, surrender the welfare system, surrender the borders. That's very emotive, isn't it? Are you comfortable with that kind of language?
Well, this election is about a choice. And what we have seen, and we saw it today in that leaked audio of a secret plan. So the figures that Labour are putting in the public domain, and the person that's going to be number 2 at the Treasury if Labour form a government basically said, oh, we're talking about 28 million, but that's tiny. And we're only talking about 28 million because the media are putting her under pressure. The actual figure is hundreds of millions. There is a massive black hole which will inevitably mean tax will go up. And when the PM pushed Keir Starmer on whether he refused to put up taxes, Keir Starmer would not commit to anything that was even hinting.
Okay,
All right,
well, Clive's joined me over here, but we've got Wes Streeting who's rolling his eyes, so we've just got to let him briefly answer that point.
I've just been talking to 2 of the audience members, okay? And they both say that they're not impressed with the offering that has been made this evening. Principally, certainly in terms of Rishi Sunak, there's a sense that there have been so many problems over the last 14 years, but also uncertainty about where the country would be heading if Keir Starmer was the Prime Minister. How do you deal with that sense that there is an apathy and a loss of trust in politics in this country? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so let me come back to James and then answer your question, Clive. So what that audio recording of Darren Jones was about was the cost of getting our entire economy to net zero by 2050. So the idea, and people have seen the hard choices we've made this side of the election to make sure our manifesto is a manifesto that's fully costed, fully funded, promises we can keep and promises the country can afford. And that has meant taking some tough decisions and saying to some people on our own side, look, the state of the public finances mean we're not going to be able to do as much as we would have liked to do as fast as we can, because the most important thing is that, as Liz Truss showed, you've got to make sure you've got a responsible approach to the economy, otherwise everyone's left paying a really high price. And it goes to this point, Clive, on trust. Now, I know that there is a total lack of trust in politics and politicians at the moment, and even, you know, with the events this week, I know there's a bit of a sort of a plague on all your houses that sort of people take away from this. It's a bad place for a democracy if people think that voting doesn't change anything. And I'd say to people, let's just reflect on since 2016. I voted Remain. I was disappointed with the outcome of that referendum. But there's no doubt that voting really changed something quite fundamental about our country's direction. 2017 and 2019, those were hugely consequential general elections. I'd argue for the worse, of course. But voting does matter. Voting does change anything. And I'd say about the NHS, we delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction ever. Look at what the Conservatives have done since. And
there's a lack of
voting doesn't change.
There is a lack of confidence in Keir Starmer from some of the people in that audience.
What I'd say about Keir Starmer, this is a guy who gripped the Labour Party from the ashes of defeat in 2019 and has fundamentally changed it. And that was hard. And it took steel. And he's got what it takes, having changed the Labour Party, to change our country if people give him that chance by voting
James,
to change.
just briefly, do you think anything will have changed
Rishi Sunak, since becoming Prime Minister, has got inflation down, he's got the economy growing, he's got wages increasing, and we are cutting taxes. So that is his personal track record. I think one of the reasons why so many people, I get this on the doorstep all the time, really uncomfortable with the idea of a Keir Starmer-led government because they don't know what he stood for. He used to stand for Corbyn, then he says he doesn't stand for Corbyn. He used to say that taxes didn't need to go up. We now know that taxes are going to go up.
Okay.
They don't know what they get, and that's why they can't take the risk, because they don't want to reverse the economic growth.
Okay, and you've both had your chance of campaigning a bit on the television to our voters, but we're very, very short on time tonight. I want a quick word, I mean it, a quick word.
Yeah, right.
8 days to go. What are you looking forward to? Quickly, Wes Streeting.
The end of this general election, I really I really hope that we get the chance to turn the page and deliver the change our country needs,
Okay,
but we're not
James,
taking anything for granted.
James Cleverly, briefly.
Well, we want to continue the work that we've done, bringing down inflation, increasing wages, getting more people into employment, protect British people for what we see in Wales, which is waiting lists longer than in England, Labour-run Wales, and Labour-run London, where crime levels are higher than the national average. We need to protect the British people from that. That's what we're campaigning for this election.
Both of you, thank you very much. You'll be
That was
shocked,
pretty
Clive.
quick, yeah.
Shocked, Clive,
Yeah, well,
that we got a bit of
surprise,
campaigning instead of a truly
surprise.
honest answer about the next 7 days. But the two men on stage tonight were the only people who can become Prime Minister next week. But you know, we know, they're not the only ones in this big race.
Yeah, the BBC has already hosted a debate with the 7 biggest parties in Britain, and politicians from 2 of those parties join us now. In a moment, we're going to be
join us
talking
now.
to
We told you
Daisy
this
Cooper from the Liberal Democrats.
And first, though, as we try to get out of the way, spin rooms can be a bit chaotic. We're going to have a chat to Keith Brown, the Deputy Leader of the SNP. Thanks for joining us alongside Daisy here. Keith, what did you make of what you saw tonight?
I think for viewers in Scotland, they'll see how completely irrelevant Scotland is, either to the Labour Party, the Tory Party, or indeed the BBC being squeezed out of this debate tonight. But also, over and above that, it was like a third-rate vaudeville act. The big things that should have been mentioned weren't mentioned. Scotland wasn't mentioned once. Brexit wasn't mentioned once, even in response to the question about the trade relationship with Europe. And austerity wasn't mentioned once. And for that reason, I think this election, and I've been in elections for 40 years now, represents the biggest fraud on the people of the UK and in Scotland that I've ever seen.
A fraud?
Because they're not talking about what the IFS has said or what the Nuffield Trust has said, £18 billion of cuts. I guarantee whoever gets in, and the Tories will lose, but Conservatism will win. We'll have lower living standards at the end of the next Parliament. We'll still have austerity. We'll still be with Brexit if Labour and Tory want to do that. There's not going to be any change, but they're not saying that in this debate.
Well, we're just seeing Rishi Sunak leaving the venue here in Nottingham tonight after a pretty fiery conversation that happened here. But Keith, the fact is, though, that you have significant powers in Scotland, and there are still many viewers in Scotland tonight who are not convinced by what they've seen from the SNP in this campaign, and you have been struggling to maintain your position. Why is that happening?
Well, I think, of course, we have had 14 years of austerity. Of course, that's produced pressure on public services. But you saw Keir Starmer, for example, tonight say the reason why Labour councils were falling over was because of lack of government funding, although he then refused to rule out giving any more funding. The same applies in Scotland as it applies in Wales. So, of course, 14 years of austerity has an effect on public services. But we have a better track record in terms of housing, affordable housing, in terms of the NHS, in terms of many areas of public policy in Scotland. And also, we have tried to mitigate the 2-child cap, which Keir Starmer wants to keep. I couldn't believe tonight I heard a Labour possible Prime Minister attacking a Tory Prime Minister for being too liberal on immigration. It's absolutely irrelevant to the interests of the people of Scotland, what we've seen tonight. And Scotland does have a chance for a better future, which is to vote for independence.
OK, Keith Brown, thank you very much indeed. A good reminder, all sorts of different races going in all sorts of different parts of the UK.
Yeah, I mean, Daisy Cooper, you're with us. I just want to understand the tactic clearly from the leadership of your party has been to find a way to cut through. So you've had Ed Davey falling off a pedalo, you've had him on bicycles, you've had him all over the place. Has that actually worked in getting the public to listen to your messages on tax and spend, pensions, foreign policy, all the other important stuff? Has it actually worked?
Yes, I think it has. I think if you listen to the debate tonight, I think the gentleman in the audience who really hit the nail on the head was the gentleman who said, is this really the best that we've got? And actually what we've seen over the last few weeks is that many people have really made a human connection to Ed Davey, because he's demonstrated that we can make people laugh, we can make them cry, and that he has a real experience, a lifetime of experience as a family carer, and people up and down the country have made that real connection. And at a time,
but are they listening to your policies? Are they hearing the heavy stuff?
I think they really are, because every time we have one of these stunts, it comes with a very serious message. So when Ed was on the paddleboard in Windermere, he was talking about the Lib Dem plan to put an end to the scandal of raw sewage dumping. When he was at a water park, he was talking about the importance of mental health and our pledge to put mental health practitioners into every primary and secondary school. And of course, Ed has talked so passionately about social care time and time again. So yes, I do think people are hearing our messages, but of course, I would have loved to have seen Ed Davey on the stage this evening, so he could have talked even more about our plans on the NHS.
Okay, you've got 7 days to go now to get that message out. What are you going to do in that 7 days? How are you going to get your voice heard again?
I think you're going to see more of the same. We're going to see a lot of fun from our campaign, making that human connection with people, delivering our message on all sorts of pledges to do with our NHS, how we're going to save social care, how we're going to have real action on the cost of living, and how we protect our local environment. Right around the country, in many places, it's only the Liberal Democrats who can beat the Conservatives and deliver the change that the country are really crying out for. We'll get that message out there loud and clear over the next 7 days.
All right, Daisy Cooper, Keith Brown, thank you.
Thank you both very much. Well, Daisy said more fun to come. I wonder what he's going to do next. I didn't think there were any stunts left. Of course, Clive, of course, the poll that matters is the one next Thursday that you will all take part in by putting your cross in a box. But at the BBC, we've been tracking all of the polls, and you can see them now. In terms of what's been happening in the polls, well, actually, during the campaign, nothing much. You can see there that there has been an uptick for reform.
Static,
Nigel Farage's party, and that is significant. The Liberal Democrats are a little bit up, but broadly speaking, the big gap between the two big parties hasn't really budged, which of course is the stuff of Rishi Sunak's nightmares. We're joined now by Vicky Young, our Deputy Political Editor. Vicky, what did you make of tonight? I mean, is it going to change anything, do you think, in the polls we've just been looking at?
I think what's really interesting there, as you've said about the polls, if you didn't know anything about those polls and you watched that debate tonight, I think that you would know who was out there fighting and trying to make up lost ground. Because the Prime Minister came out there incredibly aggressively, probably too aggressive for some people watching. I've spoken to some of his team and they say that doesn't matter. He had his core message. He wanted to get it across. It seemed well rehearsed, those lines about surrendering borders, surrendering tax, surrendering your finances. I felt he was very much directing most of that message at people who are thinking of voting reform. They were the audience for him tonight. I think that seemed quite clear, didn't it?
Yes, it felt as if that was where his discussion was. It wasn't necessarily towards the Labour Party and trying to, it feels as if perhaps from the Conservative point of view, that's gone. That ship has sailed. It's about trying to nail down those voters who might decide that they're going to go to the right, to reform.
And it plays into what the Conservatives are saying privately, a lot of them, which is this has become a damage limitation exercise. And I think on the flip side of that, if you look at Sir Keir Starmer, they're worried about complacency. So it does all go back to those polls. We know that there's been a few postal ballots gone in, but no other votes have been cast. But they do make a difference to people. And what they're worried about is people watching this who might like to vote Labour, but are thinking, well, there's no real, I don't need to bother really because you're going to win by so much. That's the message the Tories are putting out there. And what Sir Keir Starmer's trying to do is say you won't get that change that you want unless you get out there and vote for it. And I think speaking to shadow cabinet members, that's the thing they're probably most worried about, is people who still haven't made up their mind this late in the day, and they're still really trying to persuade them. And you could hear that in that final message from Sir Keir Starmer.
I mean, it's one of the interesting things about this campaign. Actually, you watching tonight might feel you've already heard too much of it, frankly, but we know, don't we, that actually voters often, for very good reason, only really tune in at the last moment. And both the parties think, despite all the politicking, there are still maybe millions of votes in play. A few days ago, Labour was even saying they think there's still 7 million votes in play, maybe around a quarter of people, and probably lots of people watching tonight. I just wonder, Vicky, when you talk to both camps, what do they think their best chances of answering the fears that you've just told us they have?
I think for the Conservatives, it's really fear of Labour they're trying to instill into those reform voters. They're trying to say to them, look, Labour will put up your taxes, Labour will mean that benefits are higher. All the things that maybe people who are thinking about Labour, who are, actually on the right of politics, are worried about. So they hope that they can really, limit the damage it might do in lots of seats. And as you say, just by peeling off more of those reform voters, they could save an awful lot of seats. And for Labour, they've got to inspire people. Is the change message enough? It's an incredibly powerful one. Of course it is, especially after a party's been in power for 14 years. But they want to get as many people out as possible. Of course they do. But they also don't want to put a foot wrong.
I wonder, Vicky, what you're looking for, expecting in the next 7 days, the final week of campaigning.
I just think everyone gets so nervous, don't they? And I think if you're a party that is this far ahead in the polls, as Labour do seem to be, you're probably going to withdraw into yourself a bit more, aren't you? You're probably going to get even more cautious. But at the same time, but also then trying to inspire people. They've really got a careful line to tread there. They've got to give people enough reason to get out there and vote, but they don't want to put foot wrong because they do feel they're pretty close, and you know, they don't want to sound complacent.
One of the interesting things someone in the shadow cabinet told me today said, I'm sick with nerves. Sick with nerves, and you can see that. You can absolutely see that. But do you think that's part of the reason why Keir Starmer did appear to be on the back foot tonight? Now, he tried to challenge some of Rishi Sunak's claims more rapidly than he had and some of these other events. But he did feel like he was sort of the one crouching away a bit, where Rishi Sunak punching away every opportunity.
Had to be on the front foot. If you're behind, you've got to lean forward.
Yeah,
you've got to lean in.
I think Rishi Sunak in the first one was quite aggressive, even more so here. But yeah, you're right, Sir Keir Starmer. But maybe he's thinking, I need to look prime ministerial. I know a lot of people watching won't have liked the interruptions, the aggression, and Sir Keir Starmer a few times said, stop interrupting me, let me answer the question. You know, maybe he felt that for him, it's fine to sit back a little bit more. But he did, as you say, he pushed back a little bit more on the taxation accusations, didn't he?
Okay, Vicky Young, our Deputy Political Editor, thank you so much for joining us here in the boiling hot spin room. The temperature of the debate was pretty hot. I wondered if either of the leaders might have... Well, that is it for tonight. 7 days to go. A week tomorrow. The power is in your hands.
Yeah, we're going to be there with you on the big night. Results night, 5 to 10. On the 4th of July on BBC One, ahead of the all-important exit poll, that nail-biting moment offering a first indication of who could be in number 10. We'll guide you through the night and the early hours as all the results come in.
So join us as your decisions about your MP, your Prime Minister and your election come in. See you then.
Bye-bye.